I never imagined that my greatest family battle would not be about money or love or inheritance, but about the very cars that told the story of my life. One dinner, one demand, and suddenly everything I had built was placed on trial by the people I loved most. My parents looked me in the eye and told me to sell every single one of my cars, not for survival, not for necessity, but to buy my sister a nearly $1 million house. That night would ignite a storm that tore through every bond we thought was unbreakable. And yet, as you'll see, that storm also revealed truths we had been ignoring for years. Before I take you into that dinner, into the betrayal and the choice I had to make, I want to pull you back to where it all began. Because to understand why I fought so fiercely, why those cars meant more than just steel and chrome, you need to understand where my story started. My name is Marisa, and my love for cars began when I was just a child in a small industrial town in Ohio. Every weekend, while other girls were playing dress-up, I begged to be dropped off at my grandfather's auto shop. The air in that garage smelled of oil and gasoline, and to me, it was sweeter than any perfume. I would sit on an overturned paint bucket, legs swinging, handing him wrenches too heavy for my little hands, listening as he hummed old jazz tunes while tightening bolts. I was 8 years old when he first let me sit behind the wheel of a dusty, half-restored 1966 Mustang. The leather was cracked, the paint faded, but in that moment, with my small hands gripping the oversized steering wheel, something lit inside me. I remember whispering to myself, one day, I'll have a car like this. One day, I'll have more. When I turned 16, my grandfather helped me buy my first car. It wasn't glamorous. It was a beat-up 1991 Ford Taurus that coughed smoke every time it started. Most teenagers would have been embarrassed, but I was ecstatic. For 6 months, he and I worked side by side, replacing parts, sanding, repainting. Piece by piece, I learned patience. Piece by piece, I learned that with enough effort, even something broken could be brought back to life. Those long nights in the garage were more than lessons in mechanics. They were lessons in survival. While my friends obsessed over dances and parties, I obsessed over carburetors and paint finishes. And I made myself a promise that one day I'd own cars not just as transportation, but as a testament to every obstacle I had overcome. But of course, life had other plans. When I told my parents I wanted to study computer science, the disapproval was instant. My father scoffed, saying computers were just a fad. My mother warned me no man would ever want to marry a woman buried in wires and code. They wanted me to become a teacher, or maybe a nurse, something they considered respectable and practical. I didn't listen. I couldn't. I took out loans, worked shifts at diners, and coded through the night just to survive. Some mornings I showed up to class with greasy hair and eyes red from exhaustion, but deep down I held on to the image of that Mustang and the little girl who had once promised herself she would not give up. And that, my friends, is why the cars were never just cars. They were chapters of my life written in metal and memory. So when my parents, years later, looked at me across that dinner table and told me to sell them all to buy my sister a house, my heart shattered. Because they weren't asking me to give up possessions. They were asking me to give up my story. This is the beginning of how I ended up moving 10 rare cars under the cover of midnight, hiding them like secrets, and why my sister's text from her very first job still makes me stop and wonder what it all meant. Before we go deeper, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to defend something you loved against people who didn't understand its value? Drop your story in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just about cars or family dinners. It's about the price of independence and the shocking things family will do when they think you owe them your dreams. College was my first real battlefield, not against classmates or professors, but against the expectations of my own family. When I declared that I would major in computer science, I could still hear my father's laugh echoing in the kitchen, sharp and dismissive. Computers are a fad, Marisa. You'll waste your time and no one's going to hire a girl to do that work. My mother, softer but no less firm, worried aloud that no man would marry a woman who spent her nights staring at screens instead of caring for a home. But I couldn't trade my dream for their approval. I had lived too many weekends in my grandfather's shop to walk away from a passion for building, fixing, and creating. It didn't matter if it was engines or code. I wanted to shape things that worked, things that lasted. So I filled out the loan applications myself. I signed my name knowing that debt would sit heavy on my shoulders for years, maybe decades. Those years in college were brutal. I juggled 2 part-time jobs, one as a waitress in a diner that smelled permanently of bacon grease, and another stocking shelves in a 24-hour pharmacy where the fluorescent lights never dimmed. Nights blurred into mornings as I staggered back to my dorm, cracked open my laptop, and coded until my fingers went numb. Sleep became a luxury, not a necessity. Some mornings I would sit in lecture, head buzzing from too much bad coffee, while classmates whispered about parties I had missed, relationships I didn't have time for. To them, I was the strange girl who lived in the lab, who carried textbooks thicker than phone books and never seemed to rest. But I had something they didn't. Resolve. A stubborn, unyielding fire that burned every time I remembered my father's scoff, every time my mother sighed and said, "This isn't what a young woman should be doing." I still remember a winter night during sophomore year when my car broke down on the way back from a night shift. I stood on the side of the road, freezing wind cutting into my skin, clutching my empty wallet and thinking, what if they're right? What if I can't do this? But then I thought of my grandfather, of the Taurus we had rebuilt, of that Mustang's steering wheel under my small hands. And something inside me whispered, keep going. Just one more day. Just one more step. What I didn't know then was how those sleepless nights would become the foundation of everything that followed. Every bug I fixed in the middle of the night, every exam I barely scraped through after a double shift, every moment I doubted myself, it was all training. Training not just for a career, but for the kind of grit I would later need when my own family would demand I give up the very symbols of my journey. And through it all, the divide between me and my family only grew deeper. While I clawed my way through debt and exhaustion, my parents continued to funnel money into my younger sister's comfort. She had every opportunity handed to her without question. When I called home, my updates about projects or scholarships were brushed aside with polite nods, but my sister's smallest achievements, a new hobby, a new haircut, were praised like triumphs. I didn't resent her then. Not fully. I just thought, one day, when I prove myself, when I build something undeniable, maybe then they'll understand. Maybe then they'll see me not as the difficult daughter who refused tradition, but as the woman who carved her own path through sheer will. So I pressed on. I graduated. I walked across that stage with my heart pounding, diploma in hand, and tears threatening to spill, not because anyone in the crowd cheered for me louder than they did for my sister's casual whims, but because I knew, deep down, that I had kept my promise to myself. The road ahead would only get harder. But standing there in my cap and gown, I didn't care. I had proven that I could endure, that no matter the cost I wouldn't bend, and that was only the beginning. Graduating was supposed to feel like a finish line, but really it was the starting gun. My first job out of college was at a small tech startup no one had heard of, crammed into a rented office above a laundromat. The pay was pitiful, the hours endless, but for me, it was oxygen. I was finally where I belonged, among builders, dreamers, and risk-takers. At first, I thought I'd drown. I was the youngest on the team, one of the only women, and I carried that weight every day. But instead of letting it crush me, I let it sharpen me. I absorbed everything: how products were designed, how deals were closed, how investors could change their tone with a single phrase. There was one person who changed everything for me, my boss, a man named Richard. He wasn't warm or gentle, but he had an eye for talent, and for some reason he saw something in me. When I stayed late to rewrite broken code, he noticed. When I asked questions about things beyond my role, sales numbers, client pitches, he didn't brush me off. He pushed me harder. He told me bluntly, "You're capable of more than this. Don't waste it." Richard became the mentor I hadn't realized I needed. He didn't sugarcoat things. When I doubted myself, he told me to stop whining and prove it. And I did. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice, leading projects that brought in our first big clients. Each win felt like a small rebellion against every doubt my parents had planted in me. But success in that office came at a cost. The hours broke me down. I ate meals out of vending machines, slept under my desk some nights, and watched friendships fade because I was never available. And still, when I called home to share a win, the response was the same. My father would ask when I was going to start a family. My mother would say she hoped I wasn't working myself sick. It was as if my victories didn't exist in their world. They believed ambition was a flaw, not a virtue. And so, with every success, I grew more determined to prove them wrong. At 27, I made the biggest gamble of my life. I quit that job. No safety net, no backup plan. Just me, my laptop, and a stubborn dream that I could build something of my own. I converted the tiny living room of my apartment into an office. The couch became my desk chair, the coffee table my conference room. Ramen noodles became my daily fuel, and my rent money stretched thinner than paper. But I had an idea, one that grew out of all those weekends in my grandfather's shop. I was going to build a software platform specifically for auto repair businesses, something to help small garages, like his had been, compete with the big chains. The risk was terrifying. My parents were horrified. My mother said, "Marissa, you're throwing away stability for a fantasy." My father scoffed, "Another one of your stubborn phases? You'll come crawling back." But instead of crawling back, I coded day and night, pouring everything I had into that program. When I finally signed my first paying client, a modest family-owned garage, I cried harder than I had on graduation day. Because this wasn't just about money. It was proof. Proof that my ideas, my sweat, my sleepless nights could create something real. As my company grew, brick by brick, so did my hunger. Every milestone fueled me. Every setback taught me resilience. And soon, with each victory, I began to indulge in something I had promised myself years ago. Cars. Not just any cars. Cars with meaning. Cars that told a story. The first was a 1967 Ford Mustang, the twin of the car my grandfather had once restored. When I slid behind its wheel for the first time, I wasn't just buying a car. I was reclaiming a memory. That Mustang was the beginning of a collection that would become both my pride and eventually the weapon my family tried to turn against me. But at that moment, in my late 20s, it was a celebration. Proof that I had fought my way out of doubt and debt and into a life of my own making. Building a company from nothing is like raising a child. You feed it, sacrifice for it, lose sleep over it, and watch it stumble before it finally learns to stand on its own. For me, every victory my business earned wasn't just a financial milestone. It was fuel for a promise I had made to myself as a little girl, that one day I would own cars that carried stories, not just engines. The Mustang was the first. I bought it just after landing our first major corporate client. The paint was dull, the leather cracked, but restoring it wasn't just about mechanics. It was about honoring the memory of my grandfather's garage. When the engine roared back to life, it was as if his laughter echoed in the sound. Then came the Jaguar, a 1974 E-Type, British racing green, purchased the day I closed my first 7-figure deal. I remember standing in the showroom, running my hand across its sleek lines, thinking, this isn't just a car, this is proof. Proof that the sleepless nights coding on a second-hand laptop had been worth it. That the girl who once worked double shifts to afford textbooks had created something powerful enough to stand on its own. The Porsche was different. A 1973 911 Carrera RS found abandoned in a barn, neglected and forgotten. Everyone else saw it as a wreck, but I saw myself in it. something written off too soon, waiting for someone stubborn enough to believe it could shine again. For 18 months, I worked alongside a restoration specialist, my hands stained with grease, my heart pounding each time we brought another piece back to life. The day the engine roared after years of silence, I cried. Not because it was a Porsche, but because it was proof of resurrection. With every professional milestone, another car joined my collection. A Ferrari 328 GTS at a charity auction. A split-window Corvette Stingray, the same model that once graced my grandfather's magazines. An Aston Martin DB5, yes, the same model James Bond drove, that made me feel invincible the moment I slid behind the wheel. Each one had its own story, its own place in the timeline of my journey. Some people buy jewelry, others buy vacation homes. I bought memories forged in chrome and horsepower. And it wasn't just about me. The cars built bridges to people who understood me in a way my family never had. I met Jackson, a brilliant restoration expert, who became my teacher and confidant in the garage. I met Sophia, a photographer with an eye for detail, who captured my collection in ways that made it look like art. Together, we started organising charity car shows, raising money for scholarships for women in STEM. My sanctuary became a source of good in the world. But still, every time I mentioned my collection to my parents, their eyes glazed over. My father sighed, muttering about wasted money. My mother clucked her tongue, asking why I didn't put that money into something useful. They didn't see the meaning in it. They didn't see the years behind each wheel, the sacrifices etched into every polished surface. To them, the cars were toys. To me, they were chapters of a book only I could write. And I should have realized sooner. That difference in how we saw the world was a storm waiting to break. As the years passed, my garage transformed into more than just a storage space. It became a museum of my own history, each car a monument to a battle fought and won. And with every new addition, the circle of people around me grew. Not family, but a chosen family, built through shared passion and respect. Jackson, my restoration partner, was the first to become indispensable. He had the kind of patience that could turn rust into brilliance. Watching him work taught me techniques my grandfather never had time to pass down. How to listen to an engine like it was speaking a language, how to polish chrome until it reflected not just light, but pride. Our late nights in the garage were more than mechanical lessons. They were conversations about ambition, sacrifice, and the peculiar loneliness of people who refuse to live by anyone else's expectations. Then there was Sophia, the photographer. She had an uncanny way of seeing what others missed. Through her lens, my cars became more than machines. They became art. She captured details I never noticed, the way sunlight kissed the curve of a Corvette's fender, or how shadows danced across the grille of the Aston Martin. Together, we started a tradition. Every year, we hosted a charity car show. Tickets sold, engines roared, and by the end of the night, the money we raised funded scholarships for women entering STEM fields. It felt like closing a circle, passing forward the opportunities I once fought for tooth and nail. Those shows became the only time my parents attended anything connected to my passion. But even then, they didn't understand. My father lingered near the food tables, uninterested in the cars. My mother smiled politely for photos, but whispered to relatives later, "It's nice, but imagine if she put this much effort into a husband and children." They couldn't see what strangers could, how deeply meaningful these cars were, how they carried my story in every line of metal. Still, inside those car shows, I felt seen. Among the rumbling engines and gleaming paint jobs, I was not the stubborn daughter or the workaholic sister. I was simply Marissa, the woman who built something extraordinary and shared it with the world. And yet, every time I stepped out of that world and back into my family's orbit, the same divide resurfaced. To them, the cars were just expensive toys. To me, they were everything I had fought for. I should have recognized the danger in that gap. I should have realized that when two worlds collide, one that sees symbols of hard-won triumph and another that sees nothing but shiny metal, The fallout is inevitable. If my garage was a sanctuary, then my sister Clara was the storm always looming on its horizon. 7 years younger than me, she had been the golden child from the moment she was born. While I was expected to earn my allowance by mowing lawns and folding laundry, Clara received hers just for existing. When I saved for months to buy a bicycle, she mentioned once that she liked a friend's bike, and my parents surprised her with a brand new one the following week. That was the pattern of our lives. When Clara borrowed my camera at 16 and dropped it, shattering the lens, my parents didn't scold her. Instead, they told me I should have been more careful about where I left it. When she snuck into my closet and returned my clothes stained or ripped, my mother shook her head and said, "Sisters share, Marisa. Don't be so possessive." By the time we reached adulthood, our paths could not have been more different. I clawed my way through college with loans and exhaustion, while Clara had her tuition fully paid by our parents. She floated through 3 different majors before deciding college wasn't her thing, and dropped out. No judgment from them, just gentle encouragement that she would find her way. Her way, as it turned out, was a carousel of short-lived jobs. A barista for 6 months, a receptionist for 3, a social media manager until she got bored of the schedule. Each role ended the same. Clara walking away because it was too stressful or not fulfilling enough. Swatting. Yet between jobs, she traveled to resorts, bought designer handbags, and filled her apartment with furniture that cost more than my entire dorm room had back in college. When I asked how she could afford it, she'd smile and wave it off. Sometimes it was credit cards. Sometimes it was a boyfriend with deep pockets. Sometimes it was a generous friend. The debt stacked higher, but my parents never seemed concerned. To them, she was still young and finding herself. Meanwhile, my own milestones, the business contracts, the growing company, the expanding car collection, were brushed aside as expected, not celebrated. The first time I landed a major corporate client, I called home, my heart bursting, only to hear my mother reply, "That's nice, dear. Are you seeing anyone yet?" That contrast gnawed at me. I wasn't jealous of Clara's lifestyle. I knew it was built on sand. What I resented was the double standard. I could bleed myself dry with work and still be called stubborn or selfish. Clara could quit another job and still be treated like a fragile treasure who just needed more time. But no matter how much I disagreed with her choices, she was still my sister. I remember the child who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I remember teaching her to ride a bike, bandaging her knees, defending her from neighborhood bullies. Those memories softened my anger every time she stumbled, and so, time and again, I tried to help her. I thought if I gave her just one more chance, one more safety net, she might finally learn to stand. But looking back now, I realize my help didn't save her. It only delayed the reckoning she desperately needed. And that delay, as you'll see, would one day explode into the most painful demand of my life. Looking back, I sometimes wonder if I was complicit in Clara's downfall, because every time she fell, I was there to cushion the landing. And each time, I told myself this would be the moment she learned, that if I just gave her one more chance, one more lifeline, she'd finally grow up. When Clara maxed out her credit cards at 22, she called me sobbing, claiming she couldn't breathe under the weight of $10,000 in debt. I stepped in without hesitation. I wrote the check, wiped her slate clean, and made her promise she'd be smarter next time. For 6 months, she was. Then the cycle began again. When she complained that she couldn't get interviews without a car, I lent her my everyday BMW. Weeks later, she returned it with takeout containers scattered across the back seat, the tank empty, and an unmistakable new dent on the passenger door. She laughed it off, saying, "Cars are meant to be driven, right?" Another time, she called me in tears after facing eviction. I paid her security deposit and first month's rent on a new apartment, only to learn she had spent that same month in Las Vegas, posting photos of champagne towers on Instagram. I even pulled strings with my network, helping her land an entry-level job at a friend's marketing firm. I thought, this is perfect, structured, creative, just her speed. She quit after 2 months, declaring the work boring and her supervisor mean. A shine. Every time she burned through another chance, my parents rushed to defend her. My mother's favorite refrain was, "She's just young, Marissa. You're too hard on her." My father would shrug. "Not everyone can be like you. She has a free spirit." As though ambition were a flaw and recklessness a virtue. The truth was, my efforts to save her were never seen as generosity. They were treated as obligation. If I bailed Clara out, it was barely acknowledged. If I didn't, I was selfish. My parents had begun to see me less as a daughter and more as an endless reservoir, a safety net for the one they still coddled like a child. And still, I tried. Because no matter how much she squandered, she was my sister. Because I believed family meant showing up, even when it hurt. But that pattern couldn't last forever. My help wasn't saving her. It was feeding her illusion that someone would always fix things for her. And one evening, when my mother called insisting on a family meeting, I had no idea that the years of enabling had built to a breaking point. That night would become the dinner where everything changed. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was pouring a glass of wine to celebrate closing an international expansion deal for my company. My mother's voice on the other end was clipped, urgent. "Marissa, we need you home tomorrow, 6 o'clock, it's important." Oh. Her tone left no room for argument, but something in me twisted with unease. Important? My mind leapt to the worst, an illness, an accident, maybe even my grandfather. I cancelled 2 client calls the next day, left the office early, and drove straight to my parents' house. When I pulled into the driveway, the first thing I saw was Clara's beat-up Honda Civic, and beside it, a sleek black Lexus I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. Inside, the living room felt staged, like a play waiting for its actors. My mother sat upright on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. My father was in his recliner, jaw set in his serious business expression. Clara was perched between them, practically glowing with anticipation. And then there was the stranger, a woman in a sharp navy pantsuit, leather portfolio on her knees, property brochures fanned out neatly on the coffee table. My stomach sank. "Marissa, this is Teresa," my father said. "She's a real estate agent." I shook her hand automatically, still scanning the brochures. Colonial-style homes, price tags with more zeros than I cared to count. "Please sit," my mother urged, patting the couch beside her. I stayed standing. "If this is about selling the house, why didn't you just tell me over the phone?" My father cleared his throat. "We're not selling our house. This is about Clara's future." Clara's smile widened as if the world was finally aligning in her favor. My father launched into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. Family obligations, supporting each other, those with more helping, those with less. My mother chimed in, nodding like a choir to his sermon. "Families stick together. Families sacrifice." Clara leaned forward, eyes sparkling. "Teresa found me the perfect place. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, huge yard, great neighborhood. I can have a home office, maybe even a gym in the basement. It's everything I've been dreaming of." She pushed a glossy listing toward me. $895,000. My breath caught, and then came the bombshell. "We think," my father said, voice firm but casual, as though suggesting a weekend chore, "you should sell your car collection and buy this house for your sister. The cars are just sitting in the garage, Marissa. This would be an investment in Clara's future." The words slammed into me like a physical blow. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "You want me to sell my cars? All of them, to buy Clara a house?" My mother reached for my hand. "Honey, you know how much she struggled. This would give her stability. You have your company, your condo. You don't need all those cars." Clara chimed in eagerly, her tone as if the decision was already made. "You could always buy more later once I'm on my feet. And you can come visit any time. Plenty of space for you to stay over." I pulled my hand away. My voice shook, but I forced the words out. "Those cars aren't just cars. They are my story. 15 years of work, of sacrifice. And even if I did sell them, how would Clara pay the property taxes, the utilities, the upkeep?" My father waved away the concern. She's interviewing for jobs, and we'd help until she's settled. Teresa assures us the property will only grow in value. Teresa, sensing the tension, jumped in with rehearsed enthusiasm. It's a wonderful opportunity. This neighborhood is very exclusive. Homes here almost never go on the market. The room spun. They weren't asking, they were expecting. When I suggested helping Clara find a reasonable apartment instead, her face crumpled into a pout. But I've already started planning the housewarming. Teresa says, my parents exchanged a look I knew too well, the one that branded me difficult. My father's voice hardened. This isn't just about a house, Marisa. This is about family. Family comes first. And in that moment, the message was clear. If I refused, I wasn't just protecting my collection. I was betraying my blood. I left that dinner with my heart pounding, anger and disbelief tangled together like barbed wire. I thought the worst of it was over, that their ambush, their glossy brochures, their manipulative speeches would fade with time. I was wrong. That night was only the opening shot in a war I never wanted. The pressure began immediately. My phone buzzed with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in months. My Aunt Susan called to tell me how selfish I was. My cousin Frank texted that I should remember how much my parents had sacrificed for my education. The story they had spread painted me as the greedy daughter who valued cars over her sister's future. No one mentioned the debts I had already paid for Clara. No one mentioned the jobs I had handed her, the rent I had covered. Then came the escalation. One Saturday, while I was in the garage changing the oil on my Ferrari, a car pulled up in my driveway. Out stepped Clara, followed by two strangers, a man and a woman, in designer clothes. Without asking, she swept past me, motioning to the garage as if it were hers. These are my friends, Keith and Samantha. They wanted to see the collection. Keith's really into vintage Porsches. Keith's hand reached out toward my 911 Carrera. Instinctively, I stepped between him and the car. Don't touch anything. These aren't for sale, and I didn't invite you here. Samantha laughed, a light, mocking sound. She said you were protective of your toys. A little childish, don't you think? And then Clara, with her careless smirk, ran her fingers along the Aston Martin's polished surface. Remember when you let me drive this one? I felt like a spy. I froze. I never let you drive the Aston Martin, she shrugged. Well, maybe it was another one. They all kind of look the same to me. That was the moment something inside me snapped. Their disregard wasn't just disrespect, it was invasion. I forced them all out, my voice low but shaking with fury. Clara paused in the doorway, her face darkening. It doesn't matter, Marisa. Dad says you'll come around. They'll all be mine soon enough. That sentence echoed in my head long after the sound of their car faded. And then, the final straw. My spare garage key vanished. At first, I thought I'd misplaced it. But a day later, reviewing security footage from my home cameras, I found what I dreaded. Clara and my father letting themselves into my garage with a key, walking between the cars, opening doors, taking photos. On one recording, my father's voice was clear. Once Marisa comes to her senses, we'll need to move quickly. My breath caught in my throat. They weren't waiting for me to agree. They were planning as if my consent didn't matter. The realization hit hard. This wasn't just family pressure anymore. This was betrayal. A quiet, deliberate scheme to take what was mine. That night, for the first time, I considered something I never thought I would have to. Moving my collection to protect it from my own blood. The decision to move the cars didn't come easily. I spent a sleepless night staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every violation. Clara parading strangers through my garage, the missing key, my father's voice on the security footage. They weren't just pushing me anymore. They were preparing to act without me. I called Jackson the next morning, my voice shaking as I told him everything. He didn't sound surprised. Funny you say that, he muttered. Last week, I got a call from someone asking about your collection. Wanted details. Models, value, condition. When I pressed them for a name, they hung up. A chill ran through me. My own family scheming behind my back, treating the symbols of my life as merchandise to be liquidated. Jackson leaned in closer, his tone steady. You need to secure them, Marisa. If they think they have a right to your cars, they might try something reckless. It felt wrong, moving my collection like contraband in the dead of night. These cars were supposed to be celebrated in the sun, shown off at charity events, not smuggled into hiding. But I knew he was right. If I hesitated, I might lose everything. We made a plan. Jackson had access to a climate-controlled warehouse he used for restoration projects. Plenty of space, secure, hidden from prying eyes. He'd gather trusted friends from the car club, people who understood the gravity of handling rare machines and who had no ties to my family. We would move them at midnight. 10 cars, 10 drivers, 10 different routes across the city to avoid suspicion. A convoy, but scattered like shadows in the night. The following evening, the air was thick with tension as one by one drivers arrived at my house. They parked discreetly down the block, slipping into my garage with hushed voices. The sight of them, men and women who loved these cars almost as much as I did, gave me strength. We stood together under the harsh fluorescent light, surrounded by polished chrome and leather that carried decades of meaning. My throat tightened. These weren't just vehicles. They were chapters of my life, each one a testament to nights I thought I couldn't go on, but did. Jackson's voice cut through the silence. Everyone knows their route, phones on silent. No mistakes. We move at 5-minute intervals. George, you're up first with the Mustang. George, a retired mechanic, gave me a reassuring nod before slipping into the driver's seat. The garage door lifted with a whisper. The Mustang rumbled to life, low and steady. I watched its taillights fade into the darkness, my heart sinking with it. One by one, they left. The Jaguar, the Porsche, the Aston Martin. Each engine note felt like a piece of me being carried away. I stood in the garage, emptier with every departure, torn between grief and resolve. Finally, it was my turn. I slid into the Lamborghini Countach, its seat hugging me like an old friend. The engine roared awake, too loud, too proud for stealth, but I didn't care. I drove through the night, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, every stoplight a pulse of fear. What if someone followed us? What if Clara showed up? But 30 minutes later, I rolled into the warehouse, headlights cutting through the cavernous space. One by one, the others were already lined up, gleaming under the dim overhead lights like soldiers standing guard. Jackson pulled in last with the Dodge Viper. The doors shut, the locks clicked, and just like that, the collection was safe. A breath I hadn't realized I was holding escaped my chest, relief mixed with sorrow. I had protected them, yes, but at what cost? I had become a stranger in my own family's story, forced into secrecy like a thief in the night. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30. My father's voice, tight with rage, cut straight through the line. "What have you done with the cars, Marisa?" For the first time, I didn't flinch. I sipped my coffee and said calmly, "They're safe. And for once in your life, Dad, you don't get to decide what happens to them." It was war now. The fallout came fast and brutal. My father accused me of betrayal. My mother wept as though I had abandoned the family, and Clara unleashed a torrent of furious texts, each one sharper, crueler than the last. "You ruined my life. You've always hated me. You'll regret this." The words lit up my phone like daggers, but I refused to answer. For the first time, I chose silence over explanation. Days later, a letter arrived from a law firm I had never heard of. It demanded I return family assets that had been improperly removed. Family assets? These cars were mine, bought with my money, titled in my name, cared for with my hands. Still, the audacity chilled me. I handed the letter to Marcus, my lawyer friend, and he laughed bitterly. "They don't have a leg to stand on. It's intimidation, nothing more." But intimidation was enough to wound. The people who should have been my protectors had become my adversaries. And in the quiet that followed, I wrestled with a grief I didn't know how to name. Because even though the cars were safe, my family no longer felt like family. 3 months passed before the storm began to settle. During that time, I poured myself into work and charity, expanding our annual car show into a scholarship program for underprivileged students. I threw myself into giving back, partly to heal, partly to remind myself that not everything in life had to be taken from me. And then, unexpectedly, Clara reached out. Not with demands, not with entitlement, just a text from an unknown number. "It's me. I got a new phone. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I'm sorry, I'm working now. Coffee's on me, if you ever want to talk." At first, I thought it was another manipulation, but curiosity pulled me to that coffee shop one rainy afternoon, where I found my sister in a green apron, hair tied back, taking orders with a tired but genuine smile. She was different, softer, humbled. When she sat across from me on her break, she didn't ask for money or favors. She only said, "I needed this. I needed to fall and finally feel the ground." That was the beginning of something new. Slowly, cautiously, we rebuilt. Clara kept her job. She paid her own rent. She even started taking night classes in business administration, confessing that one day she dreamed of running a shop of her own. For the first time, her ambitions were real, not borrowed. As for my parents, it took longer. They still struggled to accept my boundaries, but over time, even they began to understand that my refusal hadn't been cruelty. It had been necessary. The family dinners returned, but with new rules. My cars, my money, my choices. Off limits for debate. And those cars? They eventually came home, lined up once more in my garage, polished and safe. But now, when I look at them, I don't just see the story of my career. I see the night I chose myself over manipulation. I see the proof that love doesn't mean surrender, and that sometimes the most loving act is saying no. Clara still visits the garage now and then. One afternoon, as she ran her hand gently over the Porsche, she whispered, "I get it now. These aren't just cars, they're you." That acknowledgement, so simple, so quiet, meant more than all the apologies in the world. The truth is, we will never be the same family we were before. But maybe that's for the best. Because sometimes the fractures that nearly break us are the ones that let the light in. So, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. Boundaries are not selfish. Protecting what you've built is not cruel. And sometimes, by standing firm, you don't just save yourself. You give the people you love the chance to grow in ways they never would have otherwise. Have you ever had to set a boundary with someone you love? Did it feel like a betrayal, or did it save you both in the long run? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it. And if this journey spoke to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that saying no can sometimes be the most powerful way of saying I love you.